Hello and welcome back to a winning episode of the House of Hoosier podcast brought to you by the Field of 68. It's been a while since we've hopped on here. Had a relatively quiet week, but Indiana was definitely not quiet, at least in that second half against Ohio State, pulling off a comeback and getting that quad one win we've been asking them to get this entire year. You guys know us by now. He's Ben Haller. I'm Austin Platt. Ben, I guess let's start with that Ohio State game. Obviously, we had witnessed a new low in the Woodson era with that loss to Penn State, which kind of took whatever chance of the NCAA tournament and completely threw out the window. And but I mean, hey, you were there on Tuesday in Columbus and got to see the comeback. So I guess what changed in that second half? The first half was pretty ugly, and that game, quite frankly, deserved to be on Peacock behind a paywall. But I guess what'd you see from Indiana on Tuesday to at least give you some life and a win the program really desperately needed, especially the fashion they got it in.
Yeah, the defensive intensity, I think, is the biggest thing that stepped up from that second half of the first half in Indiana. Ohio State is a team that has a lot of holes offensively. They don't have a lot of different ways of scoring. They got some help by the fact that Jameson Battle didn't shoot real well from three. He's a really good three-point shooter. Roddy Gale had that outstanding first half. And Indiana just didn't have an answer for that. And being able to limit him, I think he had 15 in the first half, only 4 in the second. But being able to limit Gale was huge. I mean, we know the defensive depth, lack thereof, the defensive depth that Indiana has in the backcourt with their guards, especially when Xavier Johnson is out. Anthony Leal stepped up defensively too. That's one of the biggest things. Gabe Cupps went out with 4 fouls. I think that was in the 10 or 9 minute mark. And you expected Leal to come in and just replace him for the next 4 or 5 minutes until they feel comfortable putting Cupps in with 4 fouls. Cubs only came back into the game once with like under a minute left for defensive purposes to get Mackenzie and Baco. But I think Indiana's ability to limit Roddy Gale on the offensive side of things was huge.
A huge win for Indiana, and defensively that they turn it on after a really sloppy, sluggish first half. It's a building that at least Ohio State basketball wise, they do not have a great fan base, and I know the last few years under Chris Holtman have been very subpar. And I think honestly for him, I think he's a dead man walking in terms of his job security there because. I honestly would not have been surprised if the next morning I woke up and realized he was fired because Ohio State's had a big problem with holding on to leads lately, especially in the last few years. And that may have been the worst one against a bad Indiana team on the road that somehow pulled one out. And if we look forward, Ben, I guess let's talk more about this game before we kind of look bigger picture. Malik Reneau and Trey Galloway were awesome. Galloway finally finding his groove. I think this was by far his best game. I think he 25 points, 6 rebounds. Reneau had a career high 14 rebounds, 10 for 15 from the line as well. But both these guys stepping up. And if you do look ahead to kind of which guys are potentially going to come back, it's important to get Reneau and Galloway going. And they both played 38 minutes. Leo played 26 minutes. And I think now, at least this game shows that I think Anthony Leal deserves a shot to start on Saturday against Purdue. Defensively, his intensity is there. He's been in this program for a while, but just the way Indiana played in that first half was so pathetic. So many turnovers, and it's Ohio State. It's not a big atmosphere there. It's not very loud, and Indiana, quite frankly, didn't come out with any energy, but created their own energy in the second half, something we hadn't seen in a while. But for me, I'm ready to say Anthony Leal should start over Gabe Cupps. I think just the size advantage is enough. And I mean, hey, the guy's Mr. Indiana basketball for a reason. He's hit big shots in the past few Indiana wins. And at this rate, Indiana's got nothing to lose on Saturday, in my opinion, against Purdue. I say give Lil a shot.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I don't think there's a spot for him right now. I think Gabe Cupps, overall, I still trust Gabe Cupps more with the ball in his hands and being able to be that big point guard, especially just in your starting five in your first rotation, I think is huge. I think Gabe Cupps should start. That doesn't mean I don't think that Anthony Leal should get more minutes than he has been getting in the last few games. I think the splits on minutes wise should honestly look a lot like they did against Ohio State. And I know that's easy to say when you get a win, but I think that's something that a lot of fans thought from the beginning. Anthony Leal wasn't getting enough playing time. He showed a lot of flashes kind of in the early half of the season. Obviously had that career game against Iowa. Um, and I think he should get more minutes than Cups. I think the defensive intensity, I think, is close between the both of them. But I really like what you said, that the height advantage just gives Leal that extra kind of inch.
I think another thing is, you talk about bench points in Indiana this year. The bench has just been lackluster. Anthony Walker has not been what anyone thought. Peyton Sparks, who was great last year at Ball State. We've seen some mid-majors transfer to the Big Ten this year, and they've been fantastic. But Sparks just hasn't been that way. CJ Gunn, it just doesn't provide much, in my opinion. I'm sure he'll make a three in a garbage time against Penn State or something like that. But I think. Uh, just the bench points haven't been there. So I do see where people are coming from, where you say keep Cups in the lineup because Cups obviously isn't as much of a scorer as Leal necessarily is. But hey, Indiana got the quad one win. They got a road win. We don't know much longer it's going to stay a quad one win. Ohio State is reeling right now, and I think the rotation between the worst four teams in the Big Ten keeps switching. I mean, heck, last night Michigan got a win over Wisconsin. Ohio State is going down. I mean, the bottom four teams kind of just shuffling around, but the Buckeyes are a really, really poor team. And they had a good start to the year, and they've lost like 10 of the last 11, or they've been awful lately. And Indiana took advantage and got their first sweep over Ohio State. I think it was just the second time since Bob Knight left Indiana that Indiana actually swept the Buckeyes, which tells you something. And say what you want about Mike Woodson this year. This has been a down year. I don't think anyone actually thinks that Indiana has a shot at making the tournament, and even their NIT chances are kind of hanging on by a thread just because of their lackluster resume, which did get a big win. But it's an important win and a good stepping stone going forward. But Ben, I mean, unless some people are crazy here, I still think with this team, we're sort of waving the white flag on this season. Xavier Johnson, you really don't know what his timeline looks like. Khalil Ware, I mean, tried to dunk from the damn free throw line and nearly blew out his knee. I was watching that and I was like, oh my God, I don't know how, you didn't like laugh on the call or something like that, but
I,
how did
I
that happen?
almost did. I kind of did. I didn't really know. I had never in my 4 or 5 years of calling games had something like that happen. It was kind of an awkward call, but yeah, that was something else.
It was supposed to be the cherry on top to the comeback win, and instead it turned into a scare, and Ohio State damn near tied the game on a last second 3-point shot. But nonetheless, we can move on. Obviously, the Penn State game, really don't have to talk about that because Indiana was just dominated for 25 minutes. But it just, I still think that this season is lost. This win doesn't change anything for me, which stinks. I'm happy for the program. I'm happy for the guys. I'm happy for Woodson. He's been getting a lot of hate. And Chris Holtman has just really not put together a good team the last few years. Ever since EJ Liddell left, he's been lost and really been outcoached by a lot of people in the Big Ten. But it's an important win, I think, for the guys that are going to come back next year, which I don't know how many there are going to be, but it's important. And I still think it's a stepping stone. I think I'm past this year, Ben. I think the NCAA tournament chances are gone. You obviously could win the Big Ten tournament. I think if they go like 7-1 or something in their last 8 games, then maybe they have a shot entering Minneapolis in the tourney. But I still think this season is lost. But I still appreciate the effort that the guys had, and you could tell the frustrations that Saturday brought with the ugly loss to Penn State. I think boiled over, and I think they weren't going to allow themselves to get beat again by a bad team.
Yeah, as fun and impressive it is to win on the road, especially in the Big Ten, I just think if you watch that second half of that Ohio State game, you have to give so much credit to Indiana's defense, but I still think there aren't a lot of teams who are going to be able to play that poorly offensively as Ohio State did that game. I think Indiana's defense has been better than their offense in this point in the season, but I still don't think it's enough to carry them. I don't think they're that kind of West Virginia, Virginia type teams where they're going to consistently win games in the 60s. And once again, it kind of goes back to where we started the season, and one of the biggest question marks coming in that still hasn't been answered is like, what's the identity of this team? Like, if someone said, like, what kind of team is Indiana? Obviously, they play a lot through their posts. Purdue and Ware have been good this year, but like outside of that, it's just hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, even at one point last year, it was like I remember AJ asked me, "What's the identity of this team?" And I was like, "I don't know, like defense?" Question mark. Like
Yeah.
when that Indiana went through that 3-game losing streak last year. I mean, God, I think the five we put out last night for our intramural basketball win could have done better defensively, at least at times that even this Indiana team has showed. So you're right about the identity, and that's a problem. And I think it's a program issue right now. It's been this way for the last few years. You had Trace Jackson Davis, who's your identity, and a little bit of Jalen Hood Schifino, but now it's like, well. Malik Renew's great. He's fantastic. Obviously, the technical foul, I thought that may have been the turning point of that game. I think he wasn't going to allow himself or other guys to kind of just let them get beat up like that. And but other than that, like, what is this team's identity? Like, they don't shoot the ball particularly well. They have good post players. They play okay defense, but it's just night in and night out. You never know what version of this Indiana team you're going to get. But they've played tougher, at least in the last few games. The Illinois game was a good sign. The Iowa game was a gutsy win. And at least coming off that Penn State game, this one for 20 minutes, however long it was, 15, 20 minutes, they showed something. So positive, things moving forward. I still don't think it's enough to get anywhere close to thinking about the postseason. But Ben, it's a big game Saturday against Purdue. Obviously, that game at Assembly Hall was ugly. Purdue proving they're one of the best teams the way they've played this year. I've had a couple scares lately. That Northwestern game that went to overtime at home, that Boo Buie could have hit another game-winning shot. That one didn't fall, and they've skated by some wins lately, and they've gotten some help because Wisconsin's really starting to lose a lot of games at the top of the Big Ten. But I guess the question is, how does Indiana stay competitive? I don't have a line yet, but I mean, if it's going to be at least 2, 3 touchdowns, that Indiana's going to be, or at least Purdue's going to be favored by. And I think a lot has to do with Khalil Ware's health because that's obviously important to guarding Zach Edey. But I guess how the heck does Indiana survive and stay above water at Mackey Arena?
It's hard because I don't know if you agree with me. For as long as I've been around this Indiana program, I have not felt Indiana Purdue game with like less energy going in. I mean, people just aren't excited about this game at all. I mean, you remember last year about even going up to the first Indiana Purdue game this year, how excited students were, how buzzed the campus was. Right now, there just isn't that kind of feeling. A lot of attention's on the women's basketball team right now. But for this game, I think Indiana just has to bother Purdue defensively. I offensively, I don't think once again you can't shoot the three real well. It's just so hard to like catch teams off guard, and being able to outscore them for as much as they would have thought, and so it makes you easy to scout really. And Purdue's another team that when they don't need to guard the three well, they can be really aggressive defensively inside. I think Indiana really needs this game to be low scoring. They need to keep Zach Edey out of the paint or keep him far enough away from the basket. First time they played, Edey had like kind of an average Edey game. He wasn't really like insane, but he played well. I mean, it's Zach Edey. And Purdue just has the guards this year as compared to last year. Now with Braden Smith being a sophomore, Lance Jones has been excellent to keep this game competitive. I mean, they just have to interrupt Purdue's offense and kind of make them uncomfortable and do things they don't want them to do. Take a lot of deep twos off the dribble. That's one thing Purdue doesn't do well. They share the ball real well. They're really good catch and shoot, and they love to get Edey the ball in the paint and then work out of that. If you're able to take away a lot of those passing lanes, you make guys drive on you, and the help's there. I think that's really the only way it stays close.
Yeah, it's something interesting. One of the first thing that came to mind, at least as I think back to that game on January 16th against Purdue, the foul trouble. Indiana got in foul trouble so early, and it was tough because it was, I think, M'Baku made a few shots. He was on the bench pretty quickly. Ware dealt with Ware dealt with some foul issues. I think Renew got a few. I mean, even you look at the game on Tuesday, and Falik Sakpara is a big physical player down low. Only had 7 points, but Ware, Cups, Renew, and Ibaka all had 4 fouls, and those are arguably your four most important, well, three or most four most important players alongside Trey Galloway. But foul trouble is the biggest issue, and we've seen against Zach Edey, it's either you stop him or you foul him, and Indiana just doesn't have enough guys to rotate through fouls, and that's just the biggest thing I worry about is you give the ball down low to Edey, and he's just so big and so physical, and he's so much bigger than Khalil Ware, who hasn't been 100%, I don't think, for a few weeks. He had dealt with that sickness, had been out, and now the whole leg ankle injury issue we saw against Iowa, he was banged up, wasn't 100%. It didn't look like against Ohio State. Renew didn't look 100% against Penn State. So I think the health is just a big thing that worries me. And overall, I mean, can Indiana stay out of foul trouble? I mean, it's one thing to lose to Zach Edey against with your big men on the floor, but it's another thing to have to play Peyton Sparks or other guys like that, or Anthony Walker, who are just defensive liabilities at times. And at this rate, Honestly, you're right. This is the most like boring Indiana Purdue game. Like I really don't want to actually watch this game. But I mean, it's Indiana Purdue, and at this rate, Indiana's got nothing to lose. So why shouldn't we watch? What's the worst that's going to happen? Losing by 20 at home is pretty bad. So I mean, how much worse can it really get? But you're right. It's the fact that it's embarrassing that this game is not any more enticing for anybody, and that is on Indiana and the program, and the fact that this has really been a one-way rivalry for quite some time now. And the only thing Indiana fans really have, and we did the crossover with the old Gold Show with Casey, and he was obviously we were having some fun with him. And he was like, well, the only thing Indiana fans really have is the fact that we have banners and other stuff. But other than that, right now, Indiana's a laughing stock, and Purdue is a serious Final Four contender yet again. So, I mean, the fact that Indiana, this game, no one is actually excited to watch. I'm sorry, this is actually on your 20th birthday, Ben. There'd be nothing better for you to have a big birthday and actually get Indiana to win this game. But the fact that this Indiana Purdue game is not anywhere near what anyone wants to watch is the fact that it's an embarrassing on Indiana's end. And this program is nowhere near where it should be. And it's taken a few steps forward for Mike Woodson, but not the strides we were hoping for when he was hired. Was it 3 years ago now?
As you guys know by now, we've partnered with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers of the Field of 68 each and every week of the college basketball season. We have a special offer that will be available starting on Tuesday, January 9th and running through Monday, February 12th, the morning after Super Bowl 58. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, in honor of the big game, you can use the bonus code FIELD158 and you'll get $158 in free bets on your first wager with BetMGM, regardless of whether or not you win that first bet. Here's how you make it work. Download the BetMGM app. Sign up using the bonus code FIELD158. Deposit at least $5 and place your first wager on any game. You'll receive $158 in bonus bets regardless of the outcome of your bet. Just make sure that you use that bonus code FIELD158 when you sign up. And remember, BetMGM is now available under one wallet in select states. As a New Jersey resident, this is super convenient when I have to go cover games in New York or Philly, which happens quite a bit. When you cross state borders, you just log into your existing account and fire away. You don't have to create separate accounts in each state. It's easy, it's simple, it's clean. And most importantly, we have some fun stuff coming up for the heart of the college basketball season. Bet insurance tokens, college hoops odd boosts, and my favorite, a nice juicy parlay boost. So download the BetMGM app and sign up today. Field 158.
Well, yeah, back to the game specifically, I think Zach Edey makes it so tough because you were mentioning all the things he can do. A lot of 7-footers, even if you do have the guys to foul, you foul. But Edey doesn't miss free throws. And that's what makes it so hard. That's one of the biggest things that separates him from another 7'4" guy who's just tall. And that's why it's one of the biggest things where I hate when people just say Zach Edey is just tall, and that's the only reason he's good. I mean, he's really improved the areas that he has needed to, that you really can't take him out of the game. It's really hard to. The referees don't officiate him too tough on the defensive end. He does not get a lot of fouls, and he draws a lot of fouls on the offensive side. So even if Indiana wanted to kind of mix some guys in, foul them, totally forgetting about the foul trouble aspect, it's just hard to because he makes free throws, and it's just so hard to take him out of the game.
We go back, I think it was Braden Smith, the one who did knock down a single shot against Indiana, went like 0 for 6 from three, but it was Fletcher Lawyer who hit a bunch. So I mean, one of those two guys lights it up from three, then I mean this game could be over relatively quickly. And this is, I mean, if you look at it, obviously Indiana needs more quad one wins to even think about postseason. This would obviously be one of them, but I mean, at this point, it's like I'm still looking ahead. I'm like, all right, is Khalil Ware good enough to go to the draft? You try and get him back for another year. I think he's gone, but I don't think he's as high as he started maybe at the beginning of the year. I think that's what happens when you always go into conference play. But Renew, obviously, he's a staple. He should be back next year. But I'm thinking about, what about the other guys? Like, are we going to get Mbako back next year? What about Trey Galloway? He's going to come back for a fifth, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the team identity is something that could really be lacking, and you don't need a lot to wake up on Saturday morning and tell yourself you're taking a bus to Purdue, you're going and making the trip up north and to play your rivals in a game that everyone is counting you out of. So You need a good start. You got an okay start against Penn State, terrible start against Ohio State, and a great start against Iowa. So I mean, how does this team start, and kind of how long can they keep this game interesting? Because quite honestly, the second half of the game here at Assembly Hall was fine and all, and then obviously Indiana looked pretty good in the first 4 minutes, but there was never a point where I thought Indiana was going to win that game from the moment the ball was tipped. And hopefully they just show us something in the last few games of showing more energy and more of a fight to win and more of a reason to play for Indiana and play for the name on the front of the shirt, not the back. So um, this is just kind of the way it is, and this is kind of just after the game they played against Ohio State and the way they came back, the fact that we kind of are this deflated to go play Purdue is like, oh well, oh, here we go, here comes, and could be another ass kicking against at the hands of the Boilermakers. So just the way the program is right now, and you got some games coming up that could help your resume a little bit, Nebraska, Northwestern, but it's just one of those games where it's like, can it be over already?
Yeah, you can sit here and say all the negative things about Indiana, and rightfully so. I also think like a lot of the credit for where we are right now goes to Purdue. I mean, Painter's just done such a good job of keeping them consistent in the regular season. I know what they really want now, and really all the biggest thing what they care about is just being able to go to the second weekend in March, and this team obviously good enough to go to a national championship. But the rivalry right now, you just have two programs going in different directions. You could talk all about Indiana kind of hasn't been the same, even since like Crean had some pretty good teams that couldn't capitalize in March. But now in the Archie era and the Woodson era, there just hasn't been a ton to be excited for. But once again, it's the consistency for Purdue that's really been impressive. The kind of blueprint that Painter's built with these big 7-footers. I think he has another one on the way that's supposed to come next season. And people forget Edie still can come back next season. I don't know if he will, probably won't, but it is a possibility, and that's would be one of Indiana fans' worst nightmares.
I mean, yeah, it's obviously not every big the transition from college to the NBA is so much different for big men, especially. Think about it. Some of the best big men the Big Ten has seen lately, Kofi Cockburn, EJ Liddell, are not playing in the NBA. Even Trace Jackson Davis, it was not a true big to be fair. Isn't he's played very well for the role he's in, but I mean he's playing on a Warriors team that has Draymond Green. So I think it's as simple as that. To where a big man, it's so much different, and Zach Edey definitely the size would pose somewhat of an advantage, but in the NBA you have to be so much more technical, and Edey has shown that, and he's been a much better passer this year. I think you have to give Painter credit for that. He's made a big jump, at least passing wise, in my opinion, which could really help him in the NBA. But God, if Zach Edey comes back for another year, man, I think we're gonna pull our hair out, and oh God, that would that would really be something.
You think Indiana would forfeit the Indiana Purdue games that happened?
I think, yeah, I think there'll be a lot more technical fouls, and I think someone threw a bagel last year on the floor to Zach Edey. I think it might get worse next year, honestly.
Yeah. Once again, it's just a Purdue program that's in a really good spot. I probably don't think Edie's coming back for a fifth year. I mean, it's hard to know. But I'm also interested in see what happens on the Indiana side of things. Trey Galloway has that fifth year if he wants it. I do think he comes back. I think he loves playing for Indiana. I think he likes playing for Woodson a lot. I think you have Renew back. A lot of good signs there. I mean, McNeely coming in, still waiting to hear back on some big recruits. Still, it's just one of those things where like I'm not going to be able to tell you what the identity is before the season. And in the past, nothing in the season has been able to answer that preseason question. Even with a lot of Big Ten teams at Purdue and Michigan State obviously struggled, but you knew what their identity was coming into the year. They've stayed true to it. That's just something Indiana doesn't have.
Yeah, I mean, think of obviously, I hate to like point fingers at guys I think are a transfer, but you look at the bench as of late, like what kind of guys are going to come back from there? I think Leo has another year. I don't know if he's going to come back. Obviously he's been great for the program, been, someone who's been just fantastic for the culture, and obviously the way he, wants every game, even though he doesn't necessarily have the biggest influence the last few years, is fantastic. But I mean, just you're right. The identity of this team has been lacking, I think, for a while now, not just this year, but even at times last year. And the defense that Woodson preached, which was great 2 years ago, the only reason why they got into the NCAA tournament was that defense. It was lacking at times last year. This year, it's just been hot and cold. Like the beginning of the year, they let up like 80 points to Wright State. They this, that, the other thing. They gave up 100 to Auburn, who has looked pretty good, but giving up 100 is embarrassing, in my opinion. But it's kind of like, well, where does this team go from here? And now at this point, Ben, let me ask you this. What's the goal for Indiana kind of for the rest of the year? Obviously they didn't have the personnel. We thought Johnson's been hurt. Obviously you didn't have Ja'Kai Newton, a two-way guard, who maybe would have, helped this team to some degree. You've had injuries to Renew, Ware, etc. And Baco obviously didn't get the start he necessarily wanted. But I guess for this team, going down the line, kind of where can you feel satisfied at the end of this year when the middle of March comes around and the season ends? What can Indiana salvage to be satisfied and give you at least some hope going into the offseason?
I think if you assume that Galloway and Renew come back next year, I think consistency of those two guys is one thing I'm really looking for, and one thing that I think is going to be really positive for Indiana fans. We've seen what both of them can do. Galloway had the 30-point game earlier this season. He was really the reason they won last night against Ohio State, the biggest reason, at least. But he just has those inconsistencies. And obviously, the home and road splits before that Ohio State game have been really bad. It's all about building towards next year and kind of building that chemistry that involves Mike Woodson, that involves just having a better system and playing better defensively. And I think two guys at the forefront of that right now, considering who I think is going to leave, who's coming back, I think Galloway and Renew is a huge part.
Absolutely. And those are the two guys I don't want to say you can build around because you're going to only have 1 year left of Galloway. And if Renew makes significant strides next year, then defensively he picks things up. Then maybe he's an early exit as well. But Mbako, kind of what's the state with him? I don't think he's someone who's going to the NBA quite yet. Probably needs another year. Is he going to be back at Indiana? He's been better as of late. I think much better defensively. Still, Mike Woodson's admitted it too that he's had lapses and still needs to get up to speed of the college game, let alone the professional game. But kind of what's his status looking at for next year? And on the recruiting trail, Derek Queen. I think the more and more we wait, I think the better it is for Indiana. But I mean, looking at the way this team is structured, I mean, it is for big men. This is the big men university, and we've seen that the last few years. But a lot of things we'll still have to decide. Let me ask you this, just because I've heard a little scuttlebutt about if Indiana does get an invitation to the NIT. I still think you have to accept it and you have to play those games out. But I mean, we saw what UNC did last year, and some would say, "Oh, the NIT is not for Indiana, whatever. This is a blue blood program." I don't see a reason if Indiana right now I don't want to say the NIT bubble, but they're not nowhere near hosting an NIT game. I saw the last one they're actually supposed to go to Xavier, which is actually funny, knowing that's your second team. That would be something else at the Cintas Center if those teams meet up in the last whatever bracketology I saw. But am I crazy to think that Indiana would be really silly to deny an NIT bid?
No, I actually really think people will be silly. They're saying you should deny the NIT bid. I mean, swallow your pride. There has been so much evidence, and funny you mentioned Xavier because Xavier is one of these that like you said, they're my second team. I got to see it a couple years ago. That when you have a lot of guys returning, or at least a few guys returning, it simply cannot hurt to get more experience and get more games on the court together, especially when you're playing meaningful games, maybe not as meaningful to your team and your program, but some of these other programs that are in the NIT that aren't getting to that March Madness enough, aren't kind of in the spot that Indiana is. Those can be meaningful games and games where the other team's playing the hardest they've played all season. And like I said, it just can't hurt to play more games together. I think it helps build chemistry when you play games and you get that kind of a survive and advance mentality. The arguments are silly in my opinion that, oh, well, Indiana, a team that should be in March Madness, they shouldn't accept the NIT. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to not make the tournament. That's the bottom line. I mean, playing in the NIT or not doesn't change that you didn't have a good enough season to make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, don't make things worse. And it's only a pattern if Indiana and this 1 year, doesn't it's not a pattern that Indiana is going to be an NIT team going forward. I don't think it changes a lot about the way Woodson is viewed at Indiana. I never thought he's been the greatest game manager. Obviously, we know he's sticks to his roots, sticks to his gut, doesn't want to change a lot, doesn't believe in the three ball, et cetera, et cetera. Loves playing big men, and it's worked. And obviously, against certain teams in the Big Ten, they match up very, very well. But you have to consider that, look at what Wisconsin did last year. I'm going to pull out an example here. I know Wisconsin, everyone hates them, but they did well in the NIT last year, and now look, they were just a top 10 team. Sure, they're going to drop. They're hitting a bit of a rough patch right now, but they're playing well, and I truly believe that, and not only that, if Indiana gets to the NIT and they don't host, you're playing true road games. I don't care who's in the stands. I don't care how many people are there. Indiana has been terrible in true road games, and they got damn lucky they won that game against Ohio State because I think against 12 out of the other, or I guess 12 out of the other 13, I think Michigan's the only other team they maybe come back and beat. You don't win that game. So I think for the way Indiana has struggled in true road games under Mike Woodson, especially in a tough conference like this, when everyone beats them up, go and play in the NIT and just throw everything you have at a true road game and see where it gets you. And if you win the NIT, that doesn't mean anything. If you lose in the first round, I don't think that changes anything. But at least go and, as you say, swallow your pride. You said it very well. And don't make anything any worse. You're not making the tournament this year. You underperformed expectations. But hey, at least don't make matters worse because things are headed in the wrong direction, and everyone wants Woodson to be fired after this year, which isn't going to happen. It may not even be after next year either, considering the extension he got after last year. But hey, that ran aside. Anything else you have to say before we get ready to watch another rendition of Indiana Purdue on Saturday?
You just said don't make it worse for Indiana basketball and declining the NIT. Don't make it worse for the fans. That's my message to the fans right now, and just the amount of hate the team's getting, and deserve it in a lot of areas. But I still think this is one of the first times Mike Woodson has mostly his guys. You got to give him a little bit of time. That's my biggest thing about Mike Woodson. X's and O's haven't been terrible. They haven't been necessarily great, and the off the court stuff hasn't been great. But give the program time. A lot of moving pieces with so much talent leaving last year with Huchafino going out, Trace going out. I think people are finally seeing the importance of Race Thompson in the last few years as well. So yeah, don't make it worse.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. This is really Woodson's first year, and we knew it would have to be a big offseason for him. He was busy in the portal. And I don't think he aced the portal necessarily. I don't think he was anywhere close to it. Recruiting wise, it's been good. It's moving in the right direction. Obviously, in past administrations, Liam McNeely's nowhere close to becoming a Hoosier. Derek Queen is not in the conversation. Heck, even Boogie Fland, who people had coming to Indiana, obviously he's going to wind up at Kentucky unless anything changes. But I mean, those guys are not even close to coming to Indiana in previous years. So look at the positives. Indiana fired Archie Miller after what, 4 years of not making the NCAA tournament. Woodson got a top 3 finish last year. Got a ranked team basically from start to finish. Got a team to the tournament, which I don't think necessarily deserved to make the tournament 2 years ago. And now here we are with a team that I think talent-wise is right on par where it was 2 years ago. They dealt with injuries. Sure, Woodson has pointed fingers at that. I'm past that. Injuries, every team deals with them. It just stinks that Indiana, depth-wise, isn't as deep as other teams. And give Woodson some time. I don't know how much time Woodson even himself has left. Obviously, he's not someone when he came into Indiana. He wasn't going to be here for 10 years. He was not pulling the Bob Knight, be here for 3 decades or something like that. But at least cut him a little bit of slack. And hopefully the win against Ohio State on Tuesday changes some things around. Well, that was a quicker episode of the House of Hoosier, even after a nice 18-point comeback win against Ohio State. As we prepare for another edition of Indiana Purdue Saturday night, 8 o'clock Eastern on Fox. I can't believe it's Fox prime time. I am dearly sorry for anyone that actually will turn on Fox as a casual basketball fan. But hey, let's hope Indiana keeps it close. And hey, as Al Michael says, let's believe in miracles. And maybe Indiana will pull one off against Purdue on Saturday. But we'll talk to you next week. Indiana has a full week off next week. So we can take a lot of time to debrief when whatever happens on Saturday. Indiana will have 8 days off before a nice little 2-game homestand. So for Ben Haller, I'm Austin Platt, signing off here on the House of Hoosier. Make sure to follow us on Twitter. Keep up with the Field of 68 for all your content. And we will talk